I don't know if in an era of innovation being called a steady hand is necessarily a good thing. Let me see, how are we doing on diversity on the panel? Not too bad. Grey hair, we're getting there bit by bit. As you say, this session brings together the Insurance Ireland Council chairs. They are a feisty lot, so Declan, if you're a direct report to them, you have my sympathy. I'm both looking forward to and dreading this session, I have to say, in equal measure. Normally, one of these sessions involves a set of questions and some carefully prepared answers, and the moderator has a fair idea where it's going to end up. Not this one. I did manage to set some questions, but actually the answers are going to come as much of a surprise to me as they are to you. The panel are just so bursting with ideas and enthusiasm and passion, I think, for not only their own areas, but for developing the industry as a whole, that it was impossible to have a nice packed set of easily contained answers. So I've no idea where we're going to go on this journey. I'm looking forward to finding out. I do know on one of the calls I said, listen lads, we're going to have to try and get this thing coordinated on the day. And Donal said to me, don't worry, if it goes wrong, we'll just blame the referee. Which seemed like a great idea till I realised who the referee was, which is me. But in any event, having set what I hope are suitably low expectations for what I can achieve in keeping this under control, I'm going to ask each member of the panel briefly to introduce themselves in just 2 or 3 pithy sentences. John, can we start with you at your end?
Yeah, so John Quinlan, I chair the Non-Life Council and I'm the CEO of Aviva in Ireland as well.
Okay, I'm Donal Clancy. I chair the Health Council and I am MD of Laya healthcare. The second largest health insurer in the country, and we do a lot of different things, but we like to have some fun along the way as well.
Very good, Debbie.
Debbie O'Hare. I head up Hannover Re's operations in Ireland. Hannover Re has been in Ireland for 25 years. I've been with Hannover Re for 15, and I'm chair of the GEMA Council.
Very good, Aidan.
I'm Aidan Holton. I chair the International Council. I've just realised that the slide, which is probably up behind me, says CEO of Monument Life. That is incoming CEO, subject to regulatory approval, I might stress.
It's okay, blame the referee. Blame the referee for that.
Just in case everybody suddenly saw my colour change as that slide came up, subject to regulatory approval. Please.
Yes. Anne.
I'm Anne Kelleher, CEO of ArcLife. ArcLife, many of you will know, was set up by AIB in the 90s. We've been closed to new business since 2012. We're owned now by Swiss Re, so part of the Swiss Re group, and I chair the Life Council.
Very good. And Aidan actually is, he's a very modest man, so he did mention that he's also in his spare time a pyrotechnician, but you didn't know that. Are you still doing the farming, Aidan?
Yeah, pyrotech. Blow stuff up, grow stuff, and in my spare time I work in insurance.
What more can you ask for? We'll move on. Our first topic is reflections from the panel on this morning's presentations. I've just summarised there on the slide the topics that we heard addressed this morning. Debbie, could I come to you first? Did anything particularly jump out at you from this morning's presentations?
Yeah, I think as we looked at some of the sessions this morning, I thought about some of the reasons why international companies particularly base themselves in Ireland. And I think there are a lot of reasons well known in the past and a whole blend of reasons why companies are here. But it's really clear going forward that it'll be talent and it'll be innovation that will help those companies be sticky in Ireland if we can find ways to really leverage our local environment to innovate. And I think we're kind of uniquely placed here in Ireland because we're a small economy, but we have a very deep technological hub as well as a financial services hub that work very closely together. And being able to make that blend of skills and that local small contact network work between government, industry and universities, I think will be really crucial going forward. And we've got our own experience of doing that. In 2016, we launched an innovation competition for Hannover Re worldwide in 4 locations. And Ireland was one of the locations that we picked. And we really found that that depth of cooperation and the breadth of talent that we got as part of that was a great showcase for Ireland.
Excellent. Okay, well, we look forward to great things from Hannoverese innovation in the future. Could I move maybe to you, Anne, next?
Yeah, I thought it was a very stimulating morning. I mean, it struck me looking at Ryan's his vulnerability index there, and where insurance was, and I suppose probably no massive surprise that we're down there in that sort of right-hand quadrant where we see retail up there in the top left-hand, and so much talk over the years about disruption and what technology is going to do. And yet, it strikes me that you look at our industry, and although we've invested enormously in technology in this industry over the last number of years, and the businesses internally appear transformed, for a customer coming in, and I'm specifically, I suppose, talking life and pensions, which is my background, if you think about it, it hasn't, the way they purchase from us hasn't changed hugely. It's really still, by and large, the traditional mode through brokers. They don't contact us hugely during the life of the policy. And now this is changing, and Brona alluded to companies getting better on communications, and I think we're all getting better there, but there isn't a huge level of contact. When they do contact us, it's kind of by traditional methods. It's often just picking up the phone. And then at the very end, when they're taking the money out, it's probably a more clunky and unwieldy process still than they would like, or than we would like, if truth be told, and things like regulation and AML, and that doesn't always help. So I think as an industry, we're very conscious we're in that bottom quadrant, and we're ripe for change. And the topic today, making innovation real, if you look at all the different insurers and the massive investments being made, in terms of innovation hubs or digital garages, everybody is doing something in this space. In my own business in Swiss Re, we were taken off about 6 weeks ago. We had 2 days off site in Switzerland. One of the days devoted to basically exposing the senior management team, 90 senior managers in this division, to new technologies. And we had fantastic fun putting on headsets and going into virtual reality worlds and, being asked to jump off skyscrapers that were on fire. I mean, I have to say I didn't do that one, but super fun. Very stimulating day, sending a tweet that got a fan starting beside you, and all this stuff, bombarded with it. And let me say, if it's the 90 senior managers, it wasn't 90 millennials. There was a fair bit of grey hair in that room as well. We all came away really buzzed and excited. But then you've got well, how do I make it real? And I think that's why it's such an interesting discussion this morning. And, listening to Barry and talking about the experience in the UK, and the topic that's very dear to our heart here is auto-enrolment. And obviously the UK are a number of years ahead of us. We've been very much looking at what they've been doing, and really encouraging to hear that when the contribution rate went up earlier this year, that the opt-out rate didn't go up in tandem. But fascinating to hear from him that you're talking about in 6 minutes an employer can sign up for a scheme. That really is radical change. And it struck me, in an industry where we're waiting for it to come, we're waiting for it to happen, the game changer may well be auto-enrolment. And it's great to see that that's not too far away.
Very good. Yes, I was trying to work out how all that virtual reality stuff might equate to pension investments. But when I think about it, some of the pension investments I've made over the years were a bit like jumping off a burning building. So I can see the analogy. Maybe I come to you, Aidan, next, and your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, probably the key topic in the morning that kind of caught my interest was the topic of human capital. And it was more the construct and the titling of that session, because I think we need to start thinking about people in the same way as you think about capital. It needs to be attracted, it needs to be rewarded and retained. Capital is fluid, it can move if it wants to, and particularly in a time where we're probably a sector where we have full employment, where there's competition for talent and so on. And I'm not sure as an industry we've kind of moved out of the last 10 years where kind of, the approach of you're lucky to have a job. I don't think that applies anymore. I think there is probably, as a sector, we do need a real kind of self-examination to understand, are we running our organizations simply because of some sort of an office Stockholm syndrome type situation where people are just, they're there, they haven't thought about leaving, but if they thought about the reality of their lives and they thought about the circumstances, they'd vote with their feet. So I think that's a topic we're going to need to look at more and more, and particularly as we've kind of come through the worst of the crisis and we're back at full employment level. That's a key topic we all need to kind of really do some soul searching on.
Right, well that sets a suitably low beat tone for this. If we all thought about what we're doing every day, we'd leave. Donal, have you anything more cheerful to share with us on this?
Well, actually, I feel like I'm in a camogie match at the moment because the clock is reducing balance here. And, it kind of reminds me of jumping off a building as well. You're expecting something to happen at the end of the clock we're looking at. First of all, the thing that struck me about the weekend, or the weekend, you hear me, the day so far is that everything is connected, right? It is all connected. And the one thing that hasn't come out, and I think we are talking about it, but we're not talking about it, to the forefront, is culture of organizations. And I would like to come back to diversity a bit. And to a colleague of mine who talked there, Vianetta, I couldn't be more proud to be part of EIG when I hear her talk the way she talks. And actually, it's a good link between we're a local end-to-end business, and we're part of this global structure. And I think there's a good connection on that. And I actually did feel that as that came through. But from my own point of view, and in particular our own experiences, a lot of what we have to offer as a country is culture. A lot of what we have to do in our own business is about culture. And that links directly to diversity. And in particular, I want to mention an area that wasn't mentioned this morning. It's also about, there's the gender and the unbiased that we'll come back to actually on a technical front. But what disturbs me a lot and what we've got to get grips on is actually mental health. We're very good at the physical health bit, we're good at the ethnicity, we're good at the gender, but we actually, in this country at least, and I think it's prevalent throughout the world, we're not upfront about mental health, and we're not upfront about dealing with it in an acute basis, at the same way as you do with acute illnesses, in disability basis, to say we do mental and physical disabilities. So actually, I'll go back to where I started here, from a cultural point of view. I think a lot of what we're talking about here in the insurance industry and what's happening in technology needs to keep everybody's experiences and underpin the normal cross-section of life in what we do, and even the development of technology. Can I keep going a second? Can I just
do go on?
I'll mention one thing. There was an article there recently which was highlighted to me, which said sexist algorithms and how to fix them. Okay, it was on the Financial Times pretty recently. It's a very good article, but it highlighted something in my mind, and one thing we talked about today was machine learning. And I think it was Barry O'Dwyer brought it up first, and it came up a good few times during the day, all the way up to, those cars that are going to take me home after a few pints, right? I know that's not technically correct, okay? But there is an underpinning bias there in the fact that today we have a technology underpinned by males who develop them. And in the main, that is a bias that we have to overcome both on the technical front and on the data front, because that inherently builds in biases that have to be addressed by an industry as a whole. And to that, and how to fix it, rather than just give the problem, there's two things going on I thought were worth highlighting. One was AI for all. It seems to be based out of the US, it's school-based. The studies I'm referring to, by the way, come from the University of Virginia and the University of Boston, if you're interested. But fundamentally, it encourages young females to get involved in the STEM subjects, okay? And in Ireland in particular, I want to give a shout out to I Wish, who have exactly the same intentions, who encourage what we call that intervening gap year, I call it, for our European friends, between you do your junior exam and your senior exam here, you take a year where you do alternative things, and in that year, it's encouraging girls to get involved in technology, in the engineering, mathematics subjects, so we can increase that unbiased.
Yeah, it's definitely a very well worthwhile project that I agree with you. John, we move on quickly to you as the clock ticks down.
Thanks, Donal. Steal most of my lines. I think there's a great opportunity for Ireland, would be my thinking, as long as we're obsessing on productivity, competitiveness and innovation. When I look at competitiveness and the cost of insurance, it's really affecting big swathes of our industry. tourism, for example, is a big one. So the reforms are really welcome that are being driven by the government on that. Also interested in the whole point on diversity. When you look at great companies that have hit the rocks, as it were, diversity of thought seems to be the biggest issue. And it's interesting when we talk about diversity of thought at a time when we've had a rise in protectionism, tariffs, Brexit, Trump, Le Pen, etc. Those Titanic plates are not really being discussed because we're moving away from diversity of thought into self and protectionist views. So capital is very transient, but there's some really competing forces at odds with that as I reflect on it.
Very good. I should say that if you want to ask some questions, please do during the session. As you can see, it's very hard to stop the panel when they start talking, so I don't know that we'll have time for questions at the end. For those of you who asked for a website when Donal inadvertently referred to tech sex, don't worry, I have erased your questions. So we'll move on, if I can get the clicker to work. I can't actually, so... there we go. So the next topic is punching above our weight. As you can see, Ireland is here in its rightful place in the centre of the world. And not as Hugh Leonard, who was a playwright, some of you may remember, in the 1970s, described it as a pimple on the backside of Europe. It may have been then, but it's not now. The whole idea here is that Ireland is actually relevant in a number of large groups that are spread around the world. And the real question is, how do we keep it relevant, and where it isn't relevant, how do we make it relevant? So not an easy question. Certainly we have, you've mentioned Debbie, talent, innovation. We're pretty good at networking as a nation. But how do we fare in the battle for capital, in the battle for investment? What do we do well, and what could we do a little bit better? So a nice simple topic for the panel to have a look at. Maybe, Anne, can I start with you? Obviously, ArcLife is a big enough operation in the Irish sense. It's not the biggest part of Swiss Re, not yet.
Not yet,
Yeah.
no. I mean, to give you a sense, I mean, we've an outsourced model, so we've 35 direct employees and a number of others supporting the business. So Swiss Re has 14,000 employees. So, and we're owned by Swiss Re since 2016. And it you know, one of my challenges at the beginning was exactly that. How do you make our business relevant? How, when you're a small business, you're ticking over nicely, you're not causing problems, how do you get group to take an interest in you? And just to be clear, of course, sometimes it suits very well to be a bit under the radar, and you don't want group to be taking a massive interest in you. But in our situation, you know, we had some capacity, and I started to talk to group and to different businesses within the group about how we might use that capacity. And what I found, and I didn't know, to be honest, I didn't go in very optimistically, but what I found is I was absolutely pushing an open door. And I suppose this, you know, reflecting on, you know, why is that? And I'm not sure, I think it's many, you talked about networking there, and I think one of the things is there's so many people, Irish people, working throughout the Swiss Re group. And they're fantastic ambassadors for us. Obviously, the group got to know my business. We were getting on well, and you know, within a very short period of time, we went from sort of high-level concept to business case to implementation, essentially, and a branch of another business within the group was set up here with the support of our business. The CEO of that business, actually, George, is somewhere here in the room, I'm not sure. And look, in absolute numbers, we're not talking huge here. You know, by the end of this year, that business will, Ellipse Life, will have 12 employees. But relative to the start of 35, you know, that's a significant increase. And I think it's around look, small, open economy, obviously, all the things we know, you know, well placed in Europe, English speaking, but it's the highly educated workforce and the professional insurance force we have here. And I think although Swiss Re didn't have another presence in Ireland at that time, and doesn't still, other than ourselves and Ellipse, they do have very deep relationships here and deep partnerships, including indeed with Donal's business. And knew our workforce and knew our competency, and it's fantastic. I would say what we're experiencing now is a couple of senior folk are coming from the group. So I suppose we've had the business has been established. A couple of people are coming over to live here, and there is, you know, that's probably slightly separate. Then how do you attract people to come and maybe run those businesses? And there was a bit of a sharp intake of breath around the cost of renting, property prices. And I suppose when you're coming from, on the other hand, from Zurich and London, these places are already, they're expensive places to live. But the comment made to me was, but those places have really good infrastructure, really good transport, and I think that is some of the, and I think John's point about competitiveness is very relevant as well. Clearly, to attract the interest from group, we're going to have to really watch our competitiveness.
But is there a danger that what we're going to be is a foothold in Europe, a manufacturing centre, seen as a relatively low-grade centre? How do we bring ourselves up the value chain, which is where we need to be? Nice, simple question, maybe Debbie, for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that is the core to being part of a group, is to be able to show that you can bring more value than just kind of doing the day-to-day operations. And I fully agree with a lot of the things that Anne has said. I think being within a group, you need to look at where the opportunities might be. And as soon as you sense that the door is slightly ajar, you need to really kick through it and look at what you can leverage locally to deliver something that the group really values. And I know a lot of companies are working on different models. I guess there's been companies around for a number of years now. And like Anne's, our company would have grown very steadily. We wouldn't have gone from 10 people to 1,000 people, but we've gone from 10 to around 70 people now. That's been steady growth over a number of years, driven by these kind of initiatives and building on things like data analytics, like piloting innovation projects, where you can really bring the local sense of the technical skills, the ability to work with different cultures. Group knows that the Irish team can deliver on projects. I think that's very important. That kind of execution certainty for group, knowing that Ireland can deliver, makes a lot of sense. And I think we talk a lot in our company around the balance between being a strategy taker as a subsidiary, where it's kind of a more passive role, towards being a strategy maker. And I think you really want to move as much as you can towards the strategy maker part.
Very good, okay. I might come back and press you later to tell me exactly how we do it, but just for now, actually, maybe John, can I direct this audience question to you? Can the panel give their view on Brexit in the context of human capital? What do they see as the main challenges and opportunities for the sector coming out of Brexit?
Well, I think the obvious opportunity is, if I take Aviva, we're now going to be a pan-European hub for our overseas life and general business. So we'll get 3 or 4 billion in extra capital being deployed into Ireland. And I think it feeds into the earlier question of strategic relevance. We're never going to be as big, as much physically bigger land masses. And when you look at the world's population and where it's growing, but you can go up the value chain. So I think that we talk about housing and transport. Those are issues that are indigenous to most big cities where everybody wants to live around Europe, certainly. But I do think that people like to live in Ireland. There's a lot more room to manoeuvre in terms of how sparsely populated we are, but it does require some investment. So people like to come and live in Ireland. I think in terms of the real Brexit opportunity, it's making sure that we've got the right balance in terms of the right regulatory regime, but also the right tax regime for individuals to live here. And we're certainly seeing it as a really big opportunity that's already manifesting for us, James, as you know.
Very good. Aidan, can I come to you just piggybacking on what John has said there, because you obviously represent the industry on the government's EIF 2025 working group. Can you give us a little insight into how that might play into the opportunities for Brexit, FDI opportunities when the UK is out? Our English-speaking, well, most of us speak some modicum of English anyway, that Anne mentioned.
I suppose first and foremost, I mean, the thing about IFS 2025, I suppose I'm glad that there is an IFS 2025. The concern would have been that, with IFS 2020 and the sector getting back to full employment, that people might take, well, that's all sorted, so we can kind of close that one down. We don't need to go again. The reality is, we need to figure out a way of making what we have created sustainable and keeping that kind of going into the future. And that's very much to look at the jobs and the roles and take them up the value chain. So it's not, I don't think this is going to be about job creation, but create 10,000 jobs or create 20,000 jobs. That's not the type of strategy that's actually needed. And to be honest, if that were the goal, I'm not even sure the country could actually sustain that. just in terms of the availability of people. But what we do need to do is we do need to look at the types of jobs and make sure that we're going up the value chain so that you're making jobs that are very, very sticky. They're very strategically important in the context of the group or the organization that you're in, and they're virtually impossible to migrate to, to somewhere else or to another market. So I think that's probably one of the fundamental underpinnings of what's going to go on in IFS 2025. It's not without its challenges. So, I mean, I suppose if I reflect just two simple challenges that are going to have to be dealt with, one of them is probably Dublin itself. So, I mean, as a location, I do think, we do have a problem in terms of the concentration around, it's a very Dublin-centric industry. So the original IFSC was a kind of a much more geographically centric location down your side of the river, where you still are. But the reality is that kind of almost artificial boundary in everybody's mind has extended to Dublin. There are some exceptions, and there are some businesses very successfully kind of have relocated outside of Dublin. But that needs to continue, because it's the level of growth and the opportunity that's there isn't going to be sustainable if we continue with the current mindset around a kind of a Dublin-centric model. The good news on that one is it's not unique to the insurance sector. It actually affects virtually all sectors. So if there is a government agenda to tackle that and to try and create a better balance, I think everybody will benefit from it. The other challenge is probably, and John has touched on this as well, we do need to change the engagement model we have with government agencies. And I'm deliberately using the term government agencies because I want to go slightly wider than just the regulatory one. So, I mean, if you look at everything from social policy to planning to taxation, and indeed including the kind of the regulatory focus itself, we, as an industry, we very, very much need to reposition our engagement model with them. We need some sort of an industry advisory board that can professionally interact back and forth with government agencies. If, perhaps we can kind of take on particular challenges, or we can address particular questions, be they regulatory or tax or whatever else. And also, if you can make that a more professional and mature relationship, I think it will actually lead to a good degree of self-regulation within the industry, rather than the current kind of punitive type model, which I think is quite outdated. So IFS 2025, great that we have one. I think it's going to be about quality of jobs and about upstreaming those jobs rather than about volumes of jobs. And the challenges, I think, are Dublin centricity and the form of engagement with government agencies.
And your degree of optimism on a scale of 1 to 10 about implementation and successful outcome?
From what I've seen so far, and I mean, you can only judge by the people that are in front of you at the moment. So from what I've seen, so far with Michael Darcy and with some of the civil servants that are involved, there is a genuine intent and purpose to the guys, not just to have a shiny new document, but for a photo call, but actually to make a difference in the sector. Now, I suppose, a week is a long time in politics. As personalities change and arguably as ministers change, that can change. But for the moment, there is definitely strong intent. And I do believe they mean what they say. I do believe there's a real sense of purpose behind the guys that are driving the strategy.
Can I just piggyback off something you said there, Aidan, and to you, maybe Donal, the industry's role in making this happen, or the industry's role in engaging with government to put a different vision to make all of this work. Do you think that's working well at the moment? Do you think that needs to change?
Well, in the first instance, I'd say that we did not waste the crisis. It's important to say that we have moved on considerably from where we were at the start of the crisis, and I actually think as a whole industry, we need to make further changes and move on together, and definitely I think getting an openness and upfront questions answered is a lesson that we all have to learn across all our environment, both regulatory and the whole legal framework, along with the influence in the government, is far more open now. And I think the objective, again, going back to getting the correct customer experience and putting that at the heart of what we're doing. I genuinely believe that the crisis, and although you're talking to Laya Healthcare, who have an interesting history, let's put it that way, I do think that overall we're a better country now. and we've more to do, that's for sure, and that openness and frankness needs to continue. I just want to pick up on two things Aidan said, if I can.
Yeah.
Laya Healthcare is based in Little Island in Cork. You're all welcome down there. There's a lot of things happening out of Dublin. The CEO of AIG was mentioned earlier on there, and he's a board member of Johnson Controls, which is headquartered, a fantastic company out of Cork as well. I'm not promoting Cork, by the way. I'm just giving an example outside. Anyway, there you go.
Right. We'll move on to our final topic, which I think naturally follows on from what we've just been talking about, or perhaps we won't be moving on to it. Here we are. And this is industry engagement with the government, not just on making Ireland a more relevant place for international insurers, but you only have to open the newspapers. There are stories people giving out about flood cover, giving out about motor premiums. Universal health insurance hasn't gone away. Of course, Brexit opportunities are part of it. We have the battle for inward investment all the time. Could the engagement model between the industry, bearing in mind whose guests we are today, could the engagement model between the industry and the government be improved? Could it be better resourced? Could it be differently resourced? I might, Anne, come back and start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look, let's take a very current example, which is the pensions agenda at the moment. And there's no doubt the pensions landscape is going to be transformed in the next couple of years. And I must say, and I know we're running out of time, but Insurance Ireland, I think, did, and this is way before my time, did a tremendous job of bringing experts from all across the globe in countries where they had introduced auto-enrolment, and did a whole education piece with government stakeholders. I'm talking over years now, and I think did a very good job there. And now it's very exciting. We're at the point, we're going to have auto-enrolment. But just to give you a sense, James, at the moment, as well as there's a consultation document out there on auto-enrolment at the moment that the industry will make a submission on in the next couple of weeks. But at the same time, in parallel, two other consultation documents also related to pensions. So the Pensions Authority has one all about master trusts, and the Department of Finance has one about the structure of pensions and taxation. And so Insurance Ireland, in my view, does a very good job of marking, in that instance, a number of different stakeholders, all really dealing with the same broad issue. And oh gosh, it's gone red here now. And I think just one final point is in doing that, they absolutely, Insurance Ireland needs to rely on the experts in the member companies. And I think the experience with the pensions agenda, which is a huge one for the Life and Pensions, for the Life Council, has been the support from the members in terms of there's a pension policy working group, there's a pensions council, has been terrific. And I think the guys would say, I think the guys are doing a great job, but they'd say they couldn't do it without that support. So just an acknowledgement of that.
Excellent. Okay, in 30 seconds, Aidan, anything to add?
I suppose
That's it, Aidan. Thank you very much.
There are other industries. So, I mean, for example, if you look at the funds industry have a kind of a somewhat more formalised engagement, particularly on the regulatory front. I do think that's one that I would appeal that we end up with some formal industry-level engagement on the regulatory front, that we can work issues back and forth with. It doesn't exist at the moment, and I don't think the current model is appropriate.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We have covered a diverse number of topics. I'm glad to see we landed somewhere, even though I didn't know at the beginning where that might be. I'd just like to thank the panel for their contributions and Insurance Ireland for having us here today, and indeed you for your attention. Thank you all very much indeed.